Boss insisted I work in the office today, by user Bobber18. My boss and I had a disagreement about working from home this week. The office is in San Francisco. I live in the East Bay and need to cross the Bay Bridge to get to work. We had an important presentation scheduled today. I wanted to do it virtual because the APEC meeting is in SF this week and everything seems disrupted. President Biden and Chinese President Xi are here. It's a 2-hour commute on a typical day and I told my boss it might not be feasible to come in this week. He insisted I come in, so I said okay, but don't blame me if I get stuck in traffic. We had a pretty heated discussion about it. So today there's a huge backup on every freeway toward the Bay Bridge because protesters have chained themselves across all 5 lanes. The bridge is completely closed. Now the boss wants me to do the presentation virtual, but I told him I can't, I'm stuck in traffic. I can't operate my vehicle and do the presentation. You will have to do it without me, but he isn't really qualified. Strong-arming me into a viewing? Fine, but you won't get inside the apartment, by user Monty_Python12. I'm renting an apartment from a company, whose renting agents are somehow all unprofessional, late, and kinda slow. Had a plethora of issues with them throughout 10 months, but that's a story for another time. As I've told my landlord I'll be moving out, they instructed their agents to find a new tenant for the apartment. The way it worked, the agent would email me with a proposed date and time, and I would confirm that I'll be in at that time. I've got a cat, so I insisted on being present during the viewings. The agents never had keys. I think that's because the landlord's office is at the other end of the city, and they can't be bothered to drive an extra hour each time there's a viewing to pick the keys up, and then drop them off, so they relied on me to let them in each time. Apart from a couple of unannounced show UPS, followed by passive-aggressive emails about the messy property, all was well until a week ago. The agent emails me saying they've got a viewing on the 13th. I respond saying I've got work that day, and won't be able to do 13th. She simply replies, if you won't be able to accommodate this request, I'll ask the landlord for a 24-hour notice of entry, which is legally enforceable. Okay, do that. The day comes, I get a call. We're downstairs. Congratulations, but I'm not home, I hope you brought keys this time. Man, I wish I could see her face then. We went back and forth a bit. She tried to threaten me with legal action, to which I just replied that I don't object to them entering. They're unable to enter through their own negligence, and I have nothing to do with it. Naturally got an email from the landlord asking me to be more cooperative next time, which was promptly ignored. So sue me, really, by user hot_cryptographer552. This happened several years ago. I was working 40 hours/week programming at my main job, but I did occasional small projects in the evenings and on weekends for other clients. At one point I was referred to a large company that runs major stadiums and event venues around the country. One of their stadiums is relatively close to where I live. I'll just call them Mark 1 for this story. The saga begins. This manager at Mark 1 said they wanted a simple administration database and user interface for employee timekeeping. Apparently the old system they had was not working for them. I got details of what they wanted and drafted a set of specifications. Told them I could write the system to the specs for $2,000 flat rate. They agreed. I immediately went to work and churned out a database and UI for the system with full documentation in about 2 weeks. So I scheduled an in-person meeting to show them. Now when I showed up at the meeting, someone representing the security department was there. And he asked about getting some additional features. Sure, I told him, I can do that. So I went back, wrote up a change request and incorporated the additional features into the platform. I scheduled another meeting with Mark 1 for a couple of days later. When I got to that meeting I noticed the audience had grown. There were 2 extra people from the finance department. Can you add feature X, feature Y, and feature Z? They asked. Sure, no problem. So I left, wrote up a CR and added the features. A few days later I met with them again. Imagine my surprise when the audience size had grown, and the new attendees asked for more features. This went on for about 5 more rounds, and I was getting frustrated that I had spec'd out a 2-week project that was now taking months. And I wouldn't be paid until I delivered, and they accepted, the final product. But I chugged along implementing all their change requests. But one day the Mark 1 manager called me. Apparently she had been speaking with other departments that weren't represented in her status meetings of ever-increasing mass. She gave me a list of dozens of new features they wanted, some of which would require a complete redesign of the core database and an overhaul of the UI. I had had enough. I told her this is a complete overhaul of the original spec. I'll have to redesign and rebuild this from the ground up. Well, that's not my problem, she responded. Well, actually it is. I'm not going to design and build an entirely new system until you pay me for the current one, built to the specs we agreed on. After a short pause, she dropped a bomb on me. Well, we're not going to renegotiate. You can consider this project cancelled. That's not how this works. You still have to pay me for the work I've done. No, I don't. You haven't delivered anything. Sue me. And she hung up. Cue the malicious compliance. Meet me at the courthouse. I took Mark I manager's advice and went to the courthouse the next day to file in small claims court to recover $2,000 from Mark I. On my court date a couple of months later, I went down to the courthouse and was greeted by an arbitrator. In my state, they have court-appointed arbitrators meet the litigants when they arrive, to see if the parties can sort out the case with an agreement to maximize the judge's time. The arbitrator asked me, is there anything you would agree to resolve this immediately? I thought about it and said, if they'll pay me 90%, $1,800, right now I'll drop the suit. He then went into a side room where the Mark I manager and the corporate lawyer were hanging out. I heard her screaming that they would either pay it all or pay zero. The arbitrator came to me with the news, and I told him I heard, and I'm happy to take it all. He laughed and said no, they want to go to trial. Fast forward a couple of hours. Fast forward is a funny phrase, considering how slow the court moved, but hey, and we're standing in front of the judge. I'm at my table alone, and the Mark I manager and lawyer are standing at the opposite table. The judge asked Mark I manager to tell her side first. She went into a very long speech about the project and corporate America and apple pie and thermonuclear weapons, and honestly I have no idea because I stopped listening about 28 minutes ago. She talked non-stop for at least 30 minutes. Then the judge asked me for my story. Now I wasn't maliciously ignoring Mark I manager's long-winded tale of political intrigue and patriotism. I was actually formulating a strategy. I thought to myself, the judge probably had people who like to speechify in front of him all day every day. I also thought he might appreciate a short and sweet story that got straight to the point and didn't waste his time. So I said, Your Honor, they agreed to pay me $2,000 to design and build a software system for them. I completed the work based on the agreed specs and then they decided to cancel the project after I was done. That was it. Then the judge asked me, how do I know you did the work? I had printed out the specs, change requests, documentation, and source code the night before. I lifted a ream of paper, 500 pages, from my table and offered it to the bailiff. Here's the code I wrote for them, Your Honor. The bailiff came to take it from me and the judge waved him off. No need, I can see it from here. The judge then asked Mark I manager, is this true? She looked like she was in a daze. Yes. Then I fined for the plaintiff in the amount of $2,000. FCKU, pay me. About a month later, Mark I still hadn't paid. So I called the county sheriff and explained. Sent him the court judgment documents, and he said no problem, they'll pay. The sheriff actually called me later that day. He was on a cell phone and I could hear him talking to the Mark I manager. He told her, cut a check for $2,000 right now or he was going to rip your computers out of the wall and auction them off until the judgment is satisfied. I don't know if he had that authority, but the sheriff seemed to have a grudge against Mark I, and he was reveling in the opportunity to dog them out. Apparently Mark I believed he had the authority because, long story short, the sheriff had a $2,000 check in his hand about 15 minutes later and it was in my mailbox about a week later. Show me what's in your pants, okay, by user Pokadakalaki. This story was just told to me by my amazing Haitian grandma. She's not the greatest at speaking English, so some of this might have been a little lost in translation. We were listening to r/ and the topic of periods came up and how some people are low-key uneducated. I was telling her stories about how some girls weren't allowed to go to the bathroom by male teachers even on their periods, and she told me this gem. She said that she was in the DR for vacation and was shopping at a store. Now, she said was bigger than she is now and that she was wearing a skirt. She was, of course, on her period and was wearing a pad. It apparently was poking out the front a little. The store clerk had told the women to come to the front and had maybe noticed the bulge on my grandma. The interaction went something like this. SC, hey. What are you hiding? I'm your pants. G, nothing. SC, ma'am, I can see you smuggling something. I'm going to have to call security if you don't tell me right now. G, okay. Call them. The store clerk obliged and called security. They came shortly after and talked to my grandma. Ma'am, what are you hiding? Gee, I already said, I'm not hiding anything. You're lying. Show me. At this point, Grandma was getting fed up and just decided to follow his instructions. She pulled on her underwear and ripped that shit off and placed it on his hand. Blood exposed and all. The man apparently was appalled and screamed WTF? WTF is that and starting screaming. Other customers had come and questioned why they would think she could smuggle something in a skirt LMAO. Grandma just paid for her shit and left like the boss she is. It's us or grad school, by user Spotlight Desire. I used to work for a company that advertises knights, horses, and real weapons. If you know you know. I was a follow spot operator, basically you point the big light at the horsey man to highlight them. The company didn't seem to like hiring extra people for that position and in hindsight the turnover rate was pretty high. Plus pay was $10 an hour. This is all important. During my work there, I had had major surgery which out me out for 2 months, requiring quitting and hiring back. That never seemed to be an issue. A few months after that I developed a pre-septic bacterial infection to a mild form of sepsis, my fever was 103, and my heart rate kept going up. I was sick. This necessitated me being out for a week. However, for some reason, I had to miss an extra night of work and forgot to call in, largely because my meds knocked me out. This was my bad. Again important. At the same time I'd been accepted into graduate school, and had a class that met one Saturday a month. I was called into my boss's office to discuss the no-call, no-show. The conversation went as follows. Manager, hey, OP you did a no-call no-show. That's pretty bad. Me, I'm sorry, I sent you an email and a doctor's note after, as soon as I could. I understand this is an issue though. Manager, well, you've been written up for it, but that's not what concerned me enough to call you in today. Me, oh? Manager, you're asking for a Saturday off every month. That's our highest attendance day, we can't do that. Me, I thought with enough advance notice you could schedule around me. Manager, see, that's just the problem. We've had to constantly lean into your needs, and now it's time for you to consider our needs, and your team's needs. Me, what are you saying? Manager, it's either us or this class. Me, I need this class for full-time attendance, I can't drop it. Manager, smugly, well, I guess we'll see where we are in 2 months. Me, okay. I left his office and told my coworkers I liked goodbye. Then I clocked out. He comes storming out to my truck screaming at me, asking how I could quit on him like that. I told him he wanted me to choose between grad school or this rinky-dink job, and I made my decision. I then took off the costume belt and handed it to him, saying I'd bring the rest back when I had time. A week later, I got my first real stagehand job that paid $20 an hour. So yeah, fuck you dude. I have a master's now and I'm set to start teaching at colleges this next semester, and I'm a pro stagehand. Never give your employees shitty ultimatums.